Well, the easiest thing is to have fun. You know, I always say to people when they're looking at choosing a business is that they should do something they're passionate about. So the easiest thing for me was to talk to people about the future and to help people strategize in their companies about the future, because I get a lot of pleasure out of it, and so does my co-author. And I think one of the selling points for an entrepreneur is to show that he or she really believes in the product that they're selling you. So it was very, very easy for me to do this because I get paid for having fun.
Nick Reed founded Sales Labs in 1997 with a dream of building a better sales training company. He led a number of groundbreaking research projects to turn selling into a formula anyone can follow. The resulting books have become bestsellers, and his training is now taught in 40 countries. He now promotes the secrets of the world's fastest growing companies to help businesses everywhere. Nick, welcome to studio.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
Now, Nick, at what point does an entrepreneur decide or need to now implement a sales team into his business?
It's a good question. Most entrepreneurs know their business and their product backwards. They're always the best person to sell in the early days, and they probably won't want anyone else selling it because no one can do it as good as they do. But you know, they need to decide if their business is going to be one that brings in income for their lifestyle, in which case a number of clients will do to provide the income. The challenge that any founder entrepreneur has is that they're so busy selling, and then they have to deliver what they've sold, and while they're delivering, they're not out selling. So you often end up with businesses that have a very choppy cash flow or peaks and valleys in their business. So they need to get to a point in time where they say, if my business is scalable and can grow, now is the time that I need to put on some other salespeople to build the business beyond what I can do with my existing network and the people I'm doing favors for, or who are doing favors for me, and that initial client base. If they want to scale, they have to get other feet out on the street.
Now, is trust a big issue in terms of getting the right salespeople? Because Alon has been talking here that today he had to send out his sales team to go and clinch a deal. How does that work, especially with entrepreneurs that really know the business like the back of their hands and now having to trust in other people to make those sales?
Well, they have a responsibility, don't they, to transfer as much knowledge as they can to the new sales force, so that they can sell almost as good as the founder, and maybe bring them in on customer meetings more as the exception than the rule. And the entrepreneur needs to be willing to let go, and that can be sometimes the hardest thing for them to do. But the better they train their sales force on what is our product, why is it different, what are the value propositions that it brings to the customer, how do they benefit, and help them do as good a job at getting those messages across to the customer, then really they shouldn't have anything to fear.
You know, Nick, I was recently in a conversation with 9 other entrepreneurs where we were talking about our sales teams, and many of the people around the table spoke about the fact that their biggest issue was the fact that they perceived these salespeople when they came for the interviews to be great. And in a weird way, they were good salesmen, they sold themselves. But when it came down to actually selling, that by far the majority of their sales teams were inefficient and bad. You want to talk to that?
I think it's a fascinating point. If you were the head of a hospital and you were employing a surgeon, you'd want to make sure that that surgeon had passed all of their accreditations to actually be able to do the job. And that involves people watching them actually do surgery and giving them pointers on how to improve their technique. But when you're interviewing with salespeople, it's astonishing to me how many entrepreneurs never actually have an interview where they say to the salesperson, okay, here's a sheet of paper with some notes about some products and services and some value propositions. And on the other side of the table is somebody, not me, right, not the entrepreneur, but somebody else, who is going to play one of our typical customers that we sell to, and they've got some certain needs, and they've also got some certain objections which we often encounter. And if through your questioning you dig out all the objections and handle them and process them and end up making a sale, that'll be great. I'm going to sit over here and just watch you sell for 20 minutes. Go. But has their past success really been as a result of their ability or their company's branding? That's what every entrepreneur has to get right when they bring people on board.
Now, Nick, apart from putting that in place, are there other systems that entrepreneurs can put in place when it comes to their sales teams?
Sure. I think you've already been talking about some of them. There needs to be an effective induction program where the entrepreneur transfers their knowledge to the salespeople about, you know, all of the value and what it is that they can do. But in that needs to be a discussion about what they can, but also what they can't do, because you don't want the salespeople going out there and making promises to customers that the company can't actually fulfill. And so that's a really blunt and honest discussion that they need to have, because there's nothing worse than a salesperson promising the world, and then the guys who are then responsible for looking after the customer and delivering the product or service say, he promised what? No, we can't do that. And then you just end up with an upset customer and a bad reference in the marketplace. But similarly, you need to make sure that what promises the salesperson does make, because they know the founder, entrepreneur has said we can and want to do these things, that's documented so that when the customer is handed over to those that then provide the service and deliver the product, that they know exactly what promises they have to fulfill. Otherwise, again, you end up with a broken expectation. And so one of the systems that really needs to be put in place is that communication between departments. It's amazing the number of times salespeople go out and they don't have a meeting plan. They haven't taken the time to write down what questions do they want to ask, what ideas do they want to seed into the customer's mind to differentiate them, and what commitments do they want to ask for, and what are the things that the customer is asking for and that the salesperson has committed to. Because if that was a document that more salespeople kept, they could then hand these over to the implementation team or the customer service team, and they'd know exactly what is front of mind for the customer and deliver that. And that's what leads to great testimonials and case studies and positive word of mouth.
Nick, we've got a sales team at Race Corp, and as the sales team grew, I was the guy. I'm also in sales, as most entrepreneurs are. And as the team grew, I realized that I needed a sales manager. And I looked at my sales team, and I've got some really, really good professional salespeople. And I was always in the dilemma: do I take my top sales guy, who's been there the longest, understands the business backward, and make him the sales manager, or not? And I decided not to. And I decided to find somebody outside of the company, bring him in as sales manager to manage the existing team. And the pros and cons of that were that the pros, of course, was this was a professional manager who had been doing that before. But the con was the fact that he didn't have as much knowledge as the people who would be reporting to him. And so in a weird way, it set up a weird dynamic until he got to a point where he had that knowledge. Could you comment on that? Is my situation normal?
It's absolutely normal. It's a thing that a lot of entrepreneurs have a challenge with, because they've employed these guys, maybe they've promised them career advancement, and they want to see them grow with the business. It's a very natural instinct to want to see them move up as almost a rite of passage into a management role. But it is a good question, is that really the right thing? Because just because a salesperson and a sales manager operate in the world of sales, their job and the characteristics of what they need to do on a day-to-day basis is really much more different than a lot of people give it credit for. It's kind of like a nurse is in the same healthcare industry as a surgeon. We talked about a surgeon before, but you wouldn't expect her on Monday morning to pick up the surgeon's scalpel and start working, because she doesn't have necessarily the right temperament, background, training, and so forth. So just because somebody's been a great salesperson, what is it that's made them great in that role? Typically, they're a lone wolf. Typically, they're very autonomous. They can go into their shell and beaver away and get the result. Not always that good at sharing information, not always that good at doing the paperwork. Just leave me alone to get the number, and as long as I'm bringing in the bacon, just get off my case. And so you get people that can be very successful in bringing in the numbers. They also know the product, they know the company, they understand the culture. But once they're in a management position, the very things that made them successful as a salesperson can sometimes make them very ineffective as a team leader. No longer can they be the lone wolf. They have to learn to step back from the spotlight and get results through others. They need to understand that they have to do things maybe they've never done before, creating the forecast, managing territory sizing and allocation, doing the hiring, doing the firing. And sometimes if you've got a very social salesperson that likes to be liked by their customers, and then they're leading a team and they want to be liked by the team as well, sometimes they can't make the hard calls that a manager has to. So it really is quite a different culture.
Nick, thank you so much for your valuable advice. Thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
It's now time for the MTN Business Quick Tip of the Week.
I believe that when you're going through a change process, it's important to be very transparent. The team needs to know that we're in trouble unless we get this contract, so that they can all stick together and there can be a joint initiative with a focus to go into. But it can become dangerous if it's the norm for the company to always be on the breadline. It creates problems within the workforce that lead to mistakes being made, money being lost, and at the end of the day, the bottom line of the business is not improved at all, because it's a constant cycle of twice a year we possibly might have retrenchments, and people are living in fear from day to day.
This program is available on our website. Log on to www.businessdaytv.co.za, click on shows, and then scroll down to the Big Small Business Show. While you're there, have a look at the entry form to apply for a Raise Corp bursary to the value of 250,000 rands. Alon, what's your impression of today's show?
Katako, today's show was about process. You know, when you drive out of the building today, out of studio today, how are you going to drive out?
The same route that I'd normally take.
Yeah, so there's a route in and a route out. It's the same entrance, right? But you're going to go onto the left-hand side. There's going to be a gentleman that's going to meet you there. He's going to ask you perhaps to open your boot, to check your boot, and then it's going to open the boom and let you out. At the same time, another car might be coming in, and they would have to sign in and go and be placed in some parking. That's called process. And the reason why it's there is so that when a car's coming in and cars coming out of the same entrance, that they don't crash. They're checking because they're trying to prevent any theft, and they're probably signing you in and putting you in parking so that they control all the parking bays. Those are all processes, and they've come from many years of people who've done parking, and I'm using parking just as an example, where they've realized that they have to control the left is where you go out, the right is where you go in, and so that the whole system works far better. We spoke about with Nick in when he spoke about the sales teams. He spoke about introducing process in sales. It makes it easier, it makes it better, it makes it work far better. And what I particularly liked with Nick's interview was where he spoke about a meeting plan. That when you go into a meeting, this is the plan, there's a process, and then you can use that in order to give it to operations to execute on. So it makes the whole thing better and easier to use. What I particularly enjoyed with Fatz's interview was he took his mistakes and unpacked the mistakes and said, well, these are the areas where we haven't got a process to govern that. We're now going to create a process to govern that. As he put it, repackage it with the new process in place, and then implement it in the business so that the business doesn't repeat the same mistake. Now, very often with small businesses, they make the same mistakes again and again and again because they fail to introduce process into the business. Because entrepreneurs hate process. But I'm saying the successful entrepreneurs introduce process. Process will set you free.
Process is key. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a mail to bigsmall@bdtv.co.za or tweet us at BSBS_BDTV if you'd like to give us feedback or have your business showcased or suggest topics for discussion. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me too. And remember, if you think it, write it down and make it a processed reality.
The Big Small Business Show was proudly brought to you by MTN Business. Your success is our passion. And the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. Develop, influence, lead.